You won't believe what has happened between two of the most powerful and controversial pastors in America. It all started at an event in Dallas where two giants of the Christian world collided in an unforgettable way. Eyewitnesses claim that Bishop T.D. Jakes slapped Pastor Gino Jennings right in front of a stunned crowd. Can you imagine? A moment like this unfolding live, without warning, without anyone seeing it coming. The shocking part? What happened after left everyone speechless. Was it a misunderstanding? Or was this the beginning of a full-blown spiritual war playing out right in front of everyone? Let me tell you, this wasn't just another church drama. It was something bigger. The kind of moment that could shake the very foundation of modern church leadership. People are still talking about it. They still can't believe it. And the craziest part, we might never get the full story. There were no cameras, no recording of the incident, just a few witnesses and a lot of questions. The tension was real, and it wasn't just about a disagreement. It was about something much deeper. It was about pride, power, and what happens when two spiritual titans come head to head. The story begins with Pastor Gino Jennings, known for his fiery sermons and unfiltered opinions. If you've ever heard him speak, you know he's not afraid to say what's on his mind, even if it means calling out some of the most influential leaders in the church. Jennings is the founder of the First Church of our Lord Jesus Christ, and his ministry is rooted in a strict, no-compromise approach to holiness. He's unapologetically bold, and controversy follows him like a shadow. But that's what makes him stand out. For years, he's been calling out popular preachers for what he believes is a watered-down gospel, a message that has lost its bite, its edge. He's even labeled some of the biggest names in the Christian world as false prophets, accusing them of selling out for fame and fortune. One of the pastors Jennings has criticized the most, Bishop T.D. Jakes, and the feeling between the two has been mutual. Jakes, a towering figure in the Christian world, is known for his grace-filled, prosperity-driven message. He's built an empire with books, a massive church, and a media presence that's impossible to ignore. To many, Jakes represents everything that Jennings stands against: flashy, emotionally driven sermons, prosperity preaching, and a message that, to Jennings, feels too friendly with the world. Over the years, Jennings has publicly criticized Jakes for what he sees as a compromise of the gospel, a man who, in his eyes, has sold out in the name of success. And the truth is, this clash between two worlds, the old school fire and brimstone approach that Jennings represents and the more polished, media savvy, and grace-filled message of Jakes, has been brewing for years. But no one expected it to escalate the way it did. Both men were scheduled to speak at the Global Kingdom Leadership Summit in Dallas, but the catch? They were supposed to appear at different times in different sessions. It was supposed to be a peaceful event, an opportunity for church leaders to gather and share their wisdom. But destiny had something else in mind. Sources say that the tension between the two men had been building long before they found themselves in the same room. Gino Jennings, true to his bold nature, walked into a VIP lounge area just before one of the summit's closed-door sessions. What happened next left everyone speechless. There were several high-profile pastors gathered in the lounge, and among them was none other than Bishop T.D. Jakes. Now, here's where it gets interesting. According to eyewitnesses, Jennings, with his usual confidence, walked into the room and immediately started questioning the presence of certain pastors, claiming they were false prophets who preached for money and not for the truth. The room went silent. You could feel the energy shift as Jakes, who is known for being calm and composed, stood up. He didn't respond with anger, but his words were firm. "Brother," he allegedly said, "this isn't your pulpit. This isn't the place to attack men who are trying to build the kingdom." But Jennings wasn't backing down. He fired back, reportedly saying, "You've been building your kingdom, not God's. Don't confuse the two." And just like that, the tension in the room grew thick. Everyone knew something was about to happen. Was this just a verbal spat, or was something deeper at play? The craziest part? No one expected what happened next. Eyewitnesses say that Jakes, usually the picture of control, stood up and walked toward Jennings. He pointed a finger in his face and warned him, "You keep using my name for clout, but you won't do it to my face." The energy in the room shifted again, and then, in an instant, it happened. Some reports say that Jakes pushed Jennings back gently, a warning shot, if you will, but Jennings, unshaken, stepped forward again. That's when Jakes, possibly out of frustration or a lapse in judgment, did something no one expected: a slap across Jennings' chest. It wasn't a punch, not an aggressive attack, but it was a physical act of dominance, a clear display of power. And just like that, it was over. The moment was brief, but it left a mark. The room fell silent, and before anyone could process what had just happened, security rushed in to separate them. Jennings, looking stunned but still composed, reportedly said, "You just proved my point. The devil hides in expensive suits." The commotion was enough to send shockwaves through the event, and the word spread fast. But here's the most shocking part. There's no footage, no cameras, no videos, nothing. It happened behind closed doors, and attendees were asked to put away their phones. What followed was even more unbelievable. Both men walked away without addressing the incident publicly. No press release, no social media posts, no public statements. The silence from both camps only added fuel to the fire. People started speculating, sharing rumors, and pointing fingers. Some believed it was all a misunderstanding, while others felt this was the culmination of years of tension boiling over. But as the rumors spread, so did the intrigue. What happened in that VIP lounge? Was it a spiritual clash or something more personal? And why, after such a momentous event, did both men stay silent? The silence after the incident only made the situation more intense. People wanted answers, but neither Bishop T.D. Jakes nor Pastor Gino Jennings said a word about what had happened. Instead, their supporters took to social media, creating a storm of opinions and theories about the encounter. The reaction was immediate. Some of Jakes' followers defended him, claiming that he had been provoked by Jennings' harsh words and that his actions were justified. They argued that Jakes, being a man of grace, had shown restraint by not escalating the situation further. On the other hand, Jennings' supporters were quick to label Jakes as the aggressor, accusing him of trying to intimidate Jennings, a man who had been outspoken about the way Jakes handled his ministry. But the questions kept coming. What led to that explosive moment? What was really at stake? The leaders of both ministries knew that the story was far from over, and the longer they stayed quiet, the more speculation would grow. Everyone wanted a piece of the puzzle, and with no public statements, rumors filled the gaps. Was this the beginning of a rivalry that would engulf the church world? Or was it an isolated incident fueled by personal animosity? The event in Dallas had created a whirlwind, and now everyone was waiting for the next move. As the days passed, the tension between the two camps only grew. There were whispers of secret meetings, of attempts to calm the situation down before it spiraled out of control. But in the background, the truth began to slowly surface. It wasn't just the words that had been exchanged in that room. It was about something deeper, something more personal. The media buzzed about it, speculating on the hidden motivations behind each man's actions. Some insiders began to suggest that the rift between Jakes and Jennings wasn't just theological, it was about power, influence, and legacy. Both men were at the top of their game, commanding thousands, if not millions, of followers. But in their own way, each of them had a vision of what the church should look like, and that vision was, without a doubt, at odds. It wasn't just about theology anymore. It was about the future of the church and the direction it was headed. Jakes, with his global reach, was seen by many as a modern-day apostle, someone who had reinvented ministry to fit the times. He had successfully blended entertainment with the gospel, making church services feel more like a celebration of success than a place of quiet reflection. His message of prosperity, grace, and abundance had drawn millions, and for many, he represented hope and success. But that success came with a cost. Jakes had often been criticized for what some saw as a message that too easily aligned with the world's idea of prosperity. It was flashy, it was lavish, and some claimed it had strayed too far from the core of the gospel. Jennings, on the other hand, was a direct counter to everything Jakes represented. He stood as a fierce defender of holiness and the uncompromising gospel. His messages were clear. Sin was real, hell was real, and the church needed to stand firm on what the Bible said, no matter how uncomfortable that might be for people to hear. He preached against the prosperity gospel, calling it a dangerous distortion of God's word. In Jennings' world, the church was a place for serious, no-nonsense worship, a place where the focus was entirely on God and his righteousness, not material wealth or personal success. But despite their differences, there was something that connected them both, an undeniable understanding of how to lead, how to influence. Both men knew that in the world of ministry, there was power, influence, and a platform that could shape the future of millions. And that's where the problem lay. Both of them wanted to be seen as the true voice of authority in the church, and neither man was willing to back down. This wasn't just a theological disagreement. It was a battle for supremacy, a battle over who would define the church's future. The conflict wasn't just between two men. It was a battle for the soul of modern Christianity. Behind the scenes, there was more going on than anyone realized. As the weeks went by, sources began to leak information about private conversations that had taken place between the two men before the Dallas summit. It was clear that Jakes and Jennings had been on each other's radar for years, but it was during these private talks that the real tension started to surface. Both pastors had long-standing issues with the other's approach to ministry, but there was something more at play, something that neither of them had openly acknowledged. Their egos, their pride, and their legacy were all on the line. The pressure was mounting. The longer they stayed quiet, the more people began to pick sides. One thing was for sure, the silence wasn't going to last forever. The world was watching, and the time would soon come when one of them would have to make a move. But what would that move be? Would they reconcile, or would they go to war? And if they went to war, what would that mean for the thousands of followers who looked up to them? The stage was set for an epic showdown, and no one knew exactly how it would unfold. But there was a growing sense that things were about to get a lot more intense, and the truth behind that slap would soon come to light. As the weeks turned into months, the tension between Jakes and Jennings didn't just simmer, it boiled over. The silence that had once shrouded the controversy began to crack, and slowly, both men started to speak out, but not in the ways anyone expected. Jakes, ever the master of public relations, took a subtle approach. Instead of directly addressing the incident, he focused on his ministry, the global impact he was having, and how his message of empowerment was reaching more people than ever before. He used his platform to push forward the narrative of his success and the positive change his teachings were bringing to the world. But even in his words, there were subtle hints, unspoken barbs aimed at Jennings. Jakes wasn't going to engage directly, but he wasn't going to let anyone forget his influence either. On the other hand, Jennings took a more direct route. His sermons became sharper, more pointed. He used his pulpit not just to preach, but to attack. His message was clear. The prosperity gospel that Jakes preached was nothing but a lie, a distortion of the gospel that misled millions of people. He spoke of the dangers of materialism and the corruption that could come from a church more focused on wealth than on God. His followers ate up every word. They believed him, respected him, and saw him as the last bastion of truth in a world where Christianity had been diluted and twisted by false prophets. Despite their differences, both men were masters of persuasion. Jake's influence was global, but Jennings had a fierce, loyal following. His words cut deep because they resonated with people who felt disillusioned by the flashy, materialistic side of modern Christianity. These were people who wanted to return to what they considered the true gospel, a gospel that demanded holiness, sacrifice, and commitment. And it wasn't just about the prosperity gospel. It was about a deeper issue, what the church had become. Jakes had for many become the face of a church that was more interested in fame, wealth, and success than in the humility and devotion that Christianity called for. Jennings' criticism wasn't just about theology. It was a critique of a system that he believed had lost its way. The public rhetoric was escalating, but it was what happened behind closed doors that really stirred the pot. Rumors began to circulate about secret meetings, conversations between Jakes and other influential pastors, and even talks about a potential reconciliation with Jennings. But just when it seemed like a resolution might be on the horizon, a bombshell dropped. A leaked video surfaced showing Jakes speaking candidly about the incident. In the video, Jakes admitted to feeling disrespected by Jennings, but he also claimed that he wasn't entirely innocent in how things had escalated. He apologized for the slap, acknowledging that it wasn't the best way to handle the situation. However, he also defended his actions, saying that sometimes leaders have to take a stand, especially when they feel their integrity is being attacked. The video sent shockwaves through both of their followings. Supporters of Jennings were furious. They saw it as an admission of guilt and an attempt to downplay the seriousness of the situation. Jakes' followers, however, praised him for his honesty and for taking responsibility for his part in the altercation. They saw him as a man of integrity, someone who owned up to his mistakes while still standing firm in his beliefs. As the video continued to make the rounds, Jennings responded in his own way. He didn't release a formal statement or a video. Instead, he preached a sermon titled, "The Truth Will Stand." In it, he directly addressed Jakes, though he didn't mention his name. His words were scathing. He spoke about the dangers of pride, the temptation of fame, and how it could cloud a person's judgment. He argued that the church needed to return to its roots, to the foundational truths that had been passed down for generations. The crowd erupted in applause. Jennings wasn't just criticizing Jakes. He was challenging the very fabric of what many people believed the church had become. His followers rallied behind him, and the divide only deepened. It was clear that this wasn't just a disagreement between two men. It was a battle for the soul of modern Christianity. The debates were now widespread. Online forums, YouTube channels, and social media platforms became battlegrounds. The conflict between Jakes and Jennings was no longer just a church issue, it was a cultural one. The world was watching, and people wanted to know who would win. Would Jakes' vision of a modern, prosperous church prevail, or would Jennings' call for a return to holiness and purity take the day? As the weeks passed, the pressure continued to mount. Both men had become symbols of opposing visions for the future of Christianity, and the stakes couldn't have been higher. The public debates grew more intense, with supporters on both sides arguing their points with unrelenting passion. The media played its part, amplifying the conflict, adding fuel to the fire. Every sermon, every post, every word spoken by Jakes and Jennings was scrutinized. The lines between theology and personality had blurred, and now it was all about who could maintain their influence, who could keep their supporters loyal, and who could emerge victorious in this battle for the church's future. But as the conflict raged on, there was something neither man anticipated, a new force that was beginning to rise from the ashes of the controversy. It wasn't a new leader or a new ministry. It was a new movement, one that was being shaped by the very division they had created. The question now wasn't just about who was right or wrong. It was about what the future of Christianity would look like in a world that was growing more divided, more polarized by the day. And with every passing day, it seemed that the fallout from that one moment in Dallas was only just beginning. The months that followed were nothing short of chaotic. The division between Jakes and Jennings had sparked a wildfire, and the embers continued to burn, feeding a growing movement that no one could have predicted. While the debate over their differing views on Christianity's future raged on, something deeper was unfolding beneath the surface. People who had once been loyal to one side or the other began to question the very foundations of the church itself. They began to wonder if the battle between two influential pastors was merely a distraction from the larger issues facing the faith. Across social media platforms, the argument was evolving. Supporters of Jakes clung to the idea that the prosperity gospel was a message of empowerment, that it offered hope to people in desperate situations. They believed in Jakes' message of success, not just in material terms, but as a form of personal achievement. On the other hand, Jennings' followers, fiercely loyal to his call for purity and sacrifice, saw his stance as the last line of defense against a world that had lost its way. Both sides had their reasons, their deeply held beliefs, but both sides were also growing more entrenched in their positions. There was no room for compromise, no middle ground. But then, in the midst of all this, an unexpected shift occurred. A new voice began to emerge. It wasn't a single person, but a group of thinkers, pastors, and believers who had been watching the Jakes-Jennings conflict from the sidelines. They were disillusioned by the spectacle, frustrated by the way both sides seemed to have lost sight of the core principles of the faith. They didn't want to see the church split over personal egos or theological differences. They wanted to see the church return to its true purpose: service, compassion, and unity. At first, this new movement was small, a whisper in the wind, largely ignored by the mainstream media. But as the divisions between Jakes and Jennings continued to deepen, the new movement began to gain traction. The message was simple. The church needed to refocus on its mission: loving people, caring for the poor, and spreading the message of Christ's love and salvation. They rejected the idea of church leaders building empires or using faith as a vehicle for personal gain. Instead, they called for humility, for self-reflection, and for a return to the teachings of Jesus. Their message resonated with a growing number of people who had been turned off by the spectacle of celebrity pastors and their self-serving messages. What made this movement so powerful was that it wasn't just talking about the problems with Jakes and Jennings. It was offering solutions. It wasn't about attacking either of the two men. It was about showing a better way. The new leaders in this movement didn't want to dethrone Jakes or Jennings. They wanted to elevate the church to a place of true spiritual renewal. They wanted to bring people back to the heart of what it meant to follow Christ. As the movement gained momentum, both Jakes and Jennings began to take notice. They weren't blind to the growing discontent, and each in his own way responded. Jakes, ever the strategist, began to soften his approach. He acknowledged the need for more humility in leadership and took steps to emphasize service over success in his ministry. He began to focus more on outreach, showing his followers that the prosperity gospel wasn't just about financial blessing, but also about giving back to the community. His words became less about building wealth and more about building people. Yet, his critics weren't convinced. Many saw this shift as a calculated move, a way to regain the trust of the disillusioned without truly changing the core of his message. Jennings, on the other hand, found himself in a much more complicated position. His message had always been about standing firm in the face of opposition, about calling out the falsehoods he saw in the church. But now, with this new movement gaining ground, he was faced with a dilemma. Could he continue to criticize Jakes and others in the way he had before, Or was it time for a new approach? His followers were loyal, but the new movement was growing. And some began to ask why Jennings hadn't addressed the issues of humility and service more directly. He was a champion for purity, but was he also willing to embrace change? The public debate slowed down, but the undercurrent of change was undeniable. People were no longer choosing sides between Jakes and Jennings. They were looking for something different, something more authentic, more grounded in the real teachings of Christ. The focus shifted from celebrity pastors to the people in the pews, from high-profile controversies to the everyday challenges of living out a faithful life in a divided world. It wasn't long before Jakes and Jennings found themselves in a new kind of conversation. They were no longer just sparring with each other. They were talking about what the church needed to do to heal the wounds that had been inflicted over the past year. They began to understand that their battle, as intense as it had been, had overshadowed the very message they had both once believed in. The church, in many ways, had become distracted from its true calling, and now it was time to come together and find a way to move forward.